Are you willing to accept Christ's invitation to know Him more intimately, love Him more intensely, and follow Him more closely, and then go out into the world and live His good news? If you say yes, then you could be the 13th apostle. Join Dan Duddy and Tom Caffrey, the odd couple of Catholic radio, as they ride the radio waves 2 by 2 to share the goodness, beauty, and truth of Jesus Christ and His church. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the 13th apostle.
Though half of life is gone for good, and we haven't acted as we should, you feel it in your heart of wood that this is far from over. Shorelines gone and maps destroyed, livelihoods dissolved and void, entire languages unheard, and still it's far from over. Be sure you teach your kids to swim and navigate by stars above. The fate of landlocked life is grim when you ignore our will to love. When all that's left is to see and say.
Once you know, you cannot look away. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the 13th Apostle, where we explore the good, beautiful, and true of the Catholic faith and the Catholic Church. This is Tom Caffrey with my co-host, Dan Duddy. How you, Dan?
Hey, Tom. How are you doing?
All right. Little extra we mentioned right before, a little sober by this experience. And that was a recording of This Is Far From Over by Bonnie Prince Billy. And I think that we look to see what's with the topic, the subject matter of our episodes. We generally don't do superficial. I mean, we never do superficial. Somewhere there's varying levels of depth. And this topic of Pope Francis' encyclical Laudato Si, praise be, is, I'd say, from my perspective, one of the deepest. And part of that was from the reading in the material, and I told you that we were assigned this encyclical when it came out, because I was in school at the time this came out, and I'm a different person than I was then. I didn't mean I didn't like it, but I was still in more of the left-right, conservative-liberal, and I'm not that man anymore. I've learned too much, and it's kind of like what I said in the beginning, which is not. This is not my original thought. Once you know, that's true for anything. Once you know, you can't unknow it. You can't unring the bell, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is, the encyclical on well, we'll say casually the environment, the ecology, but that's not the thrust of it. So, what's your what do you have to say there, buddy?
Yeah, I'm right with you on that. I always thought that this topic was more of a political football than anything else until, and you brought up the idea of digging into this for this episode. And when you get up under that whole political football type concept of, you said left versus right, right versus left, it really comes down to the beauty of creation, and there's a wonderful, beautiful depth to it. And Pope Francis, who took on the name, St. Francis of Assisi, brings us to the heart of St. Francis of Assisi, as does St. Pope John Paul II, in, making him the patron of those who work for ecological righteousness. And it's really there's a whole lot of depth to it. And I said to you before the mic went on, it really brought me out to the woods, and it brought me out to a strong desire for things that, a busy football coach may not have ever done before. I mean, I'm guilty of it, so I don't want to make a blanket statement like that, but I would look at the autumn leaves around the practice fields for 40 years, and I would say, wow, that's really nice. But to move forward into creation in the depths of what Laudato Si brings us to. And my brother-in-law, Father Gerard Sheehan, a salt priest out in Texas, I was talking to Maura. Maura's not home right now. She's in South Carolina with the grandkids.
By the way, Dan, some may have heard SALT, S-A-L-T, so...
Yes, Society of Our Lady, the Most Holy Trinity. Thank you, Tom. And I was mentioning to Maura that you had come up with this topic, and she said, oh my goodness, Father Gerard Sheehan said it is one of the most beautiful encyclicals to ever be written and read.
Glad to hear that.
Yeah, and that's where you're going. And you have that heart, Tom. You have the garden, and you really do get down in the dirt, literally and figuratively. And I've always admired that in you, and I never really had that slow down patience to be where my feet are like you do with regards to that. I had gardens, but, I wanted them to be fast and furious, prolific. But you really dig in, don't you, Tom? You do enjoy creation. Yeah. And we only have a 25-minute show or whatever. We can get on and talk about our responsibility. We could talk about, sovereignty of the earth and stewardship and all the things that I've studied going into this episode. And if we get to that, we get to that. But I want to let you know that I thought about you a lot in this preparation, and that St. Francis kind of heart that you have.
Wow, that's pretty moving to hear, and I appreciate that, buddy. Yeah, I just, it's coincidental that you would mention my gardens. I wasn't thinking about them, even though I'm looking out the window at them right now. I had two tradesmen over here. Oh, I guess it was late last week, and they both looked out the glass door, the back door, and they both had the reaction. I think I mentioned that a reaction a realtor had last year when I had her over doing a tour, and they had okay, maybe this is, the Irish in me, but I don't think so. I'll just say a jaw-dropping. They wanted the name. I'm going to give you the business card of the gardener. No, but yeah, it's it's funny because you talk about the woods, and I'm thinking of trees and how many years I rake leaves. I don't rake leaves. I haven't raked leaves in a while. I grind them up. I mean, I just put the mower over them. They're mulch. That's just it's one. The encyclical, it's like that. It's like that quote. Once you know, you can't unknow. You can't look away.
Right.
I mean, you can. We have the freedom. But what that quote really means is, how could you look away?
Right.
Once you know. And that's true of anything. We have a choice of living in the abstract world, which is really not living. That's just imagining. Right? It's like, it's right. It's like you and I've talked about, what do you know about football? Do you know football, right? Have you experienced it?
Mm-hmm.
And, I think about, this is not a knock on men and women who've served our country from the standpoint of we usually mean that in the context of military service. I mean that in military service and many other services, because we all serve our country, but specifically the military. But if you have somebody who's not faced combat, somebody who's faced combat, not that the one who's faced combat, they may or may not be more heroic. And we've heard our dear friend Jim Mulvihill talk about that and questioning the whole idea of heroism and whatnot. But as he's also said, once the first round goes off and it's whizzing by your head, there's no more abstraction. So that's what when you talk about you going into the woods, this is supposed to bring, Pope Francis wants to awaken us. And this is what any encyclical is supposed to do. And he wants to awaken us.
Yeah, and he does a wonderful job by the grace of the Holy Spirit in doing that, and I'll speak for that personally. And as you said, you can't unsee it. Once you feel it, once you see it, you can't unsee it, and then it calls you to action. And what are we going to do about it? And there's a great website that piggybacks off of Laudato Si, and it's the action plan. I think it's Laudato Si platform, but it's a wonderful action plan with a whole bunch of subdivisions. And what are we going to do for the poor? What are we going to do for education? And I don't want to dig into that now, but I recommend our listeners to take a good look at that. But what I did learn, because I went straight to Genesis in my head before I broke off studying, and I listened to actually a great Franciscan young brother priest, and talking about dominion and how Pope Francis really went hard in studying and interpreting Genesis, because there was so much dominion in Genesis that it was warped to the point that we were perversely using the resources because of the way Genesis is written, and it was a very how would you say, a very damaging interpretation by some, and so he had it studied by intellectual theological scholars and so forth, and kind of backed it out towards stewardship for a short while in the interpretation of our responsibility to creation. But ultimately, because in stewardship there's still centrality, but we recognize that it's God's household, whereas in dominion we see it as our household, like this earth was given to us, and in our many the faults, the fallenness of humans, we can't handle that. We're gonna mess that up. But in stewardship, we see it as God's household. We move away from sovereignty or dominion, but we're still at the center, but not with so much free reign and dominance and arrogance. But ultimately, he calls us through Laudato Si to kinship, the community of creation, not far much at all, or very much so integrated with St. Francis of Assisi. And but I imagine you, with your poetic heart, have dug into the canticle, right? The canticle of creatures. And you might want to take the time, with your ability to write poetry and read poetry, maybe take the 5 minutes to put that out to our audience. But I just want to say, if you're going to do that, in kinship, and I do have that poem open, by the way, too, there's a deeper understanding of our interconnection with all of creation, the stars, the cosmos. And I actually gave a talk. You were there. I think you were sleeping. I'm smiling right now.
No, I was not.
You still hold to that?
I'm sensitive to that charge.
Yeah, I know. We have the same DNA as all creation. Nitrogen, carbon, hydrogen, the same DNA that's out into the stars and into the cosmos. So in kinship, there's no sovereignty, there's no centrality. We are all the same in creation. We're not rulers. We are not landlords of God's house, but we're siblings. We're brothers and sisters, and that's what the canticle of creatures is all about. Becoming and honor thy mother and thy father. Honor the father.
Yes.
In this home. Yeah.
Yeah, the kid, right? Brother, sun, sister, moon.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets into sister. Sister, brother, what he's doing there for St. Francis, it's relationship, and it's relationship with each other, but that we're not separate. When it's like we say humanity and nature, as if we're not part of nature. And you said perfectly, just said, we've got the elements, and we have the periodic table in us, like all of creation does. Some of us even have gold in our mouths. But we just that's what I think we mentioned at the very beginning, that the encyclical is not primarily about the ecology, but it's about the damage in the relationship between humanity and the natural world. Yeah,
Amen.
okay, we're part of it. We really know what he's talking about, and what really anybody knows when they say that. My point a moment ago is that, well, we should understand that we are part of this natural world, obviously, but we do have the idea, and you mentioned several times about dominion, and it's an interesting. Life is always interesting, good and bad, but it's always interesting. And because I was reading the encyclical Rerum Novarum by Pope Leo XIII. And ladies and gentlemen, I do recommend, it's not, as encyclicals go, it's shorter than many of them. And I think some of them, most of the ones that I've read, are pretty straightforward. I mean, it's a letter to the world, well, Pope Francis this is a letter to the world, even though it's sent out to the bishops in the Catholic Church, but it's meant for the world. And Pope Leo, in his encyclical, it's on capital and labor. And it's really amazing. This encyclical, Rerum Novarum, forms the basis for Catholic social teaching. And that's probably the main reason I recommend our audience read that encyclical. Take your time and read it, a chapter or a paragraph at a time. And I've seen a paragraph, they're numbered. So, but he defends the importance of private property. And property is, well, back then a man's or a woman's wages in another form. And so, the criticism of Pope Francis, and usually this comes from, quote unquote, the right, conservatives. And I have my disagreements. You and I have talked about our disagreements, so we could disagree with any pope, respectfully. And then, okay, well, what's your disagreement? And then defend that. And then what do you think you should do or we should do? But I think that, the criticism could be, well, it's socialism. All right, well, it's the planet is everyone, so everybody can do whatever they want. And of course, then you get into the problem of migration. And there's, well, borders. You don't have a country if you don't have borders. Yeah. But this is the dilemma for Christians. This is the dilemma, especially when it ceases to become abstract. And friends in our audience here, I'm going to put in our show notes, I'm going to put a link to a YouTube video. It's about an hour and 20 minutes, and it's on Laudato Si. Oh my gosh. The Pope, the environmental crisis, and frontline leaders. The letter Laudato Si film. And it's expertly done. It's very powerful, very moving. And I had to remember, okay, part of that moving spirit was because they use music of certain type, and so that always adds to it. And you can have disagreements with that. And part of that, there's some powerful scenes about the migrants coming principally from Africa to Europe. And what do you do? Was the West part of the problem in exploiting? Now, I'm not an anti-colonialist, but we have to see things the way, we read, we learn about things. We can't just take these sound bites that somebody who's not an expert, or just anybody randomly, and say, okay, well, that's got to be the truth. We got to explore it. We get multiple readings or listenings or whatever to say, okay, well, have we helped to damage some of their environment? Have we taken their minerals, let's say? Have we taken their oil and whatnot? And so they have, all they know is poverty. So they come over there, they try to get to Europe. They're desperate. What are you going to do? I mean, Dan, the rubber always hits the road when you say, okay, well, what if Jesus were standing with me?
Yeah, you find out what are we made of now when push has come to shove. When you have African immigrants escaping poverty, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah.
Escaping, the loss of resources, and then coming into a country with resources. And now that's where the rubber hits the road, as you say. Now it's like, who are we? Like, no, these are our resources. Go back to where you came from. Or are we going to go to the fundamental truth of like Laudato Si and get right down to the dirt, as Pope Francis brings us, and say we are all one here, and we're going to make this work. But it's that complex intrusion of politics. Man, it's complicated, right, Tom? Like, where do you draw the line? No pun intended. Draw the line when it comes to boundaries. And
no, you gotta. A country has borders. It's defined by its borders, in
right.
the actual country, the landmass. So do you, and you have to get you use the P word, politics. Does any migrant assimilate? Is it the second generation that assimilates? Do they want to become part of the culture that they've now been allowed in, invited in by some countries? Okay, well, now you're part of this country. Are you going to assimilate and be part of this country and the culture of this country? You can still have your own culture, but in terms of the overarching culture, whether it's the Italian culture, the American culture, German culture, you got problems in Germany, big time. You got problems in Europe.
We're Irish, Tom. We're here because the Irish came here, and there's an assimilation, that's expected, but there also has to be a core truth that says you got to come meet us here. But also, just like in a football locker room, there definitely is an assimilation because you have codes, you have creeds, you have your organizing principles. But no matter what, that chemistry is going to change by the sheer nature of your presence, because you're going to bring it to it, and that's Christ-like. That's Christian. That you are invited to be yourself, but by the same token, we have rules that make us us, and especially so. I think God stands by us when we have a country that flies under one nation, under God.
Well, let me stop you just for a second, Dan, and go to your football reference. Your football team is like a nation,
right?
And you got people that want to be a part of that nation,
right?
They've got to agree that they're going to do as that nation does, and they're going to be part of helping that nation be successful.
They have to be educated firstly on who we are, what's expected of them.
Yeah, they can't form. You can't have a pocket of them forming on the aside and say, well, no, we want to do whatever the way we were playing football, our own way, whatever that was. No, it doesn't work that way, or it doesn't work well that way. And you can see that the riots in England, the riots in Ireland, the ongoing conflict in Germany with all these the migrants that they I think Angela Merkel let in I think 1.5 million in a fairly short period of time. So we're not trying to say, okay, we get all emotional, worked up by watching a video or reading more, meditating on Laudato Si, and disregard the real concerns. Okay, it's going to cost trillions to make make changes in how a country behaves. And you got countries who are losing their shoreline and whatnot and saying, hey, you first world countries, you made your trillions partly off of us, but you made your trillions and you've polluted much more than we've polluted. But look what we're suffering. So this is so complicated.
It is complicated, but it just really brings back to, we must go back to the beauty of creation and get our feet back there. Ultimately, that's where we're going to wind up. Ashes to ashes. We need to go back to creation, go back to the earth, get our feet on the ground, till the soil, as Genesis tells us, Genesis 2 tells us.
Okay, so Christ says to Dan Duddy and Tom Caffrey, are you willing to sell your riches and follow me, and sell your homes, maybe sell your cars, maybe get a tiny apartment, something like that, and then give that money to the poor? This is, we are called to do something, Dan.
Yes, we are. And once again, Laudato Si has a great website, a great action plan that, I'd like you to take a look at too, Tom. And I'm going to take a look at that video that you've offered to our audience.
All right, and I'm going to I'm going to read this and then we'll wrap it up. Humanity has lived on this planet and watched it and observed it for thousands of years. We've learned a lot. We didn't call it ecology or conservation. We just felt that somehow here there was something more wonderful and mysterious and majestical and powerful at work. So we called it sacred. And that's true for probably every culture that's ever lived. All right, Danny. Great.
Yeah, this was a nice episode, Tom. I enjoyed this. All right, folks, stay tuned for The Angelus and Your Prayer Intentions with Peter and Jemmy.
I was just thinking, Danny, how, yes, blessed because we're doing it for the Lord to have this platform at WQPH Radio. You know, to dig into topics like this and learn them and live them. This is we should be living every episode that we do and that we have done. So this one is obviously no exception. So what a blessing. WQPHradio.org, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your support. Thank you, Marianne, Gene, James, Tom, and the crew. God bless you, Danny. God
bless you, Tommy, and God bless you all.
Hello, this is Peter and Jeremy. I'm the host of Your Prayer Intentions every Saturday at noon on WQPH 89.3 FM, and I want to talk specifically to you, the local businessman who is in our listening area. Now, we at WQPH is a Catholic radio station. We have an apostolate to bring the word of the church to our local community, to bring it comfort, to bring it prayer, and that's so important in these tough times. Now, this is something that we have to do. It's our apostolate. It's the thing that God has called us to do. Now, as a local businessman, you're also trying to reach the local community. You want your product or your service to be associated with something positive in that community. And I often say the right thing is the smart thing. And there is nothing smarter than to have your product or service associated with the greatest product of all time, the Word of God, the Word that comforts, the Word that protects, and the Word that brings people light in times of darkness. If you'd like to help us do that here by underwriting a show at WQPH, you can contact us at WQPH893@Comcast.net. That's WQPH893@Comcast.net. Again, WQPH893@Comcast.net. Make your great product or service be a part of something greater.
Thank you for listening to The 13th Apostle with Dan Duddy and Tom Caffrey. For more information on Dan, visit his website at www.danduddy.com or email dcduddy@gmail.com. Tom's website is faithpilgrims.com or email trcaffrey@faithpilgrims.com. How about you? Will you be the 13th Apostle?